Hello, everyone. This is going to be a reading of Lecture 1 from the book Rosicrucian Wisdom by Rudolf Steiner. And let's begin Lecture 1. I think you guys are really going to enjoy this book. Lecture 1. The New Form of Wisdom. The title of this course of lectures has been announced as Theosophy According to the Rosicrucian Model. By this is meant the wisdom that is primeval yet ever new, expressed in a form suitable for the present age. The mode of thought we are about to study has existed since the 14th century A.D. In these lectures, however, it is not my intention to speak of the history of Rosicrucianism. As you know, a certain kind of geometry, which includes, for instance, the theorem of Pythagoras, is taught in elementary schools today. The rudiments of geometry are learned quite independently of how geometry itself actually came into being. For what does the pupil who is learning the rudiments of geometry today know about Euclid? Nevertheless, it is Euclid's geometry that is being taught. Not until later, when the substance has been mastered, do students discover, perhaps from a history of the sciences, something about the form in which the teaching that is accessible even in elementary schools today originally found its way into the evolution of humanity. As little as the pupil who learns elementary geometry today is concerned with the form in which it was originally given to humanity by Euclid, as little we need concern ourselves with the question of how Rosicrucianism developed in the course of history. Just as the pupil learns geometry from its actual tenets, so shall we learn to know the nature of this Rosicrucian wisdom from its intrinsic principles. Those who are acquainted merely with the outer history of Rosicrucianism as recorded in literature know very little about the real content of Rosicrucian theosophy or wisdom. Rosicrucian wisdom has existed since the 14th century as something that is true quite apart from its history, just as geometrical truths exist independently of history. Only a fleeting reference, therefore, will here be made to certain matters connected with the history of Rosicrucianism. In 1459, a lofty spiritual individuality, incarnate in the human personality who bears in the world the name of Christian Rosenkreuz, appeared as the teacher of a small circle of initiated pupils. In 1459, within a strictly secluded spiritual brotherhood, the Fraternitatis Rosicrucis, Christian Rosenkreuz, was raised to the rank of Equis Lapidis Aureae, Knight of the Golden Stone. What this means will become clearer to us in the course of these lectures. The exalted individual who lived on the physical plane in the personality of Christian Rosenkreuz worked as leader and teacher of the Rosicrucian stream again and again in the same body, as esotericism puts it. The meaning of the expression again and again in the same body will also be explained when we come to speak of the destiny of the human being after death. Until far into the 18th century, the wisdom of which we are speaking was preserved within a secret brotherhood, bound by strict rules which separated its members from the exoteric world. In the 18th century, it was the mission of this brotherhood to allow certain esoteric truths to flow by spiritual ways into the culture of Central Europe. That is why we see flashing up in an exoteric culture many things that are clothed, it is true, in an exoteric form, but which are, in reality, nothing else than outer expressions of esoteric wisdom. Let me interject here, since we're trying to keep this focused on new learners and people who are seeking this stuff out for the first time. Esoteric means inner wisdom, and exoteric means outer wisdom. So if you picture like a donut, the inner circle of the donut where they knock the donut hole out of, that would represent, that's like a diagram of where esoteric wisdom would be, and then the outer ring of the donut, that's like exoteric. So esoteric teachings are to be found in all religions, and you'll get like the Sufi Muslims. That's the esoteric teaching of Islam. The exoteric would be, various forms of Islam which are not the esoteric teaching. So you get your radical Islam, you get your moderate Islam, you get your just purely orthodox Islam. But then the Sufi represents the esoteric. You'll have it in Christianity. You have various forms of Christianity. You have your radical sections of Christianity like Westboro Baptist Church. And then you've got your more moderate ones. And then you've got your Orthodox. And then you've got your esoteric Christians who would be called Gnostics. So each religion has this. I just wanted to clarify because when we're throwing around words like esoteric and exoteric, it can be hard to follow for people who are unfamiliar. So, let's continue. In the course of the centuries, a good many people have endeavored, in one way or another, to discover the Rosicrucian wisdom, but they did not succeed. Leibniz, for example, tried in vain to get at the source of this wisdom. Yet Rosicrucian wisdom did light up like a flash of lightning in an exoteric work which appeared when Lessing was approaching the close of his life. I refer to Lessing's Education of the Human Race. Reading between the lines, if we are esotericists, we can recognize by its singular ending that it is an external expression of Rosicrucian wisdom. This wisdom lit up in outstanding grandeur in the man in whom European culture, and indeed international culture, was reflected at the turn of the 18th century, in Goethe. While he was still comparatively young, Goethe had come into contact with a source of Rosicrucianism, and he then experienced, in some degree, a very remarkable and lofty initiation. To speak of initiation in connection with Goethe may easily be misleading, so it is appropriate to mention something extraordinary that happened to him during the period after he left Leipzig University and before he went to Strasbourg. He underwent an experience that penetrated very deeply into his soul and expressed itself outwardly in the fact that during the last period of his stay in Leipzig, he came very near to death. As he lay desperately ill, he had a momentous experience, passing through a kind of initiation. He was not actually conscious of it at first, but it worked in his soul as a kind of poetic inspiration. And the process by which it flowed into his various creations was most remarkable. It flashes up in his poem entitled The Mysteries, which his closest friends considered to be one of his most profound creations. This fragment is indeed profound that Goethe was never able to recapture the power to formulate its conclusion. The culture of the day was incapable of giving external form to the depths of life pulsating in this poem. It must be regarded as coming from one of the deepest founts of Goethe's soul, and is a book with 7 seals for all his commentators. As time went on, the initiation worked its way increasingly into his awareness, and finally, as he grew more conscious of it, he was able to produce that remarkable prose poem known as The Fairy Tale of the Green Snake and the Beautiful Lily, one of the most profound writings in all literature. Those who are able to interpret it rightly know a great deal of Rosicrucian wisdom. At the time when Rosicrucian wisdom was intended to flow gradually into the general life of culture, it happened, in a manner of which I need not speak further now, that a kind of betrayal took place. Certain Rosicrucian conceptions found their way into the world at large. This betrayal, on the one hand, and on the other, the fact that it was necessary for 19th century Western culture to remain for a time on the physical plane, uninfluenced by esotericism. These two facts made it imperative that the sources of Rosicrucian wisdom, and above all its great founder, who since its inception had been constantly on the physical plane, should apparently withdraw. Thus, during the first half, and also during a large part of the second half of the 19th century, little of Rosicrucian wisdom could be discovered. Only now in our time it has become possible to make the Rosicrucian wisdom accessible again and allow it to flow into general culture. If we think about this culture, we shall discover the reasons why this had to be. I will now speak of two characteristics of Rosicrucian wisdom which are important in connection with its mission in the world. One has to do with people's whole attitude towards this Rosicrucian wisdom, which is not the same thing as the esoteric form of Christian Gnostic wisdom. We must touch briefly upon two facts pertaining to the spiritual life if we are to be clear about the fundamental character of Rosicrucian wisdom. The first of these is the relationship of the pupil to the teacher, and here again there are two aspects to consider. We shall speak first of what is termed clairvoyance, and secondly, of what is called belief in authority. Clairvoyance, the term, is really inadequate, comprises nothing. Let me repeat this. Clairvoyance, the term, is really inadequate, comprises not only spiritual seeing, but also spiritual hearing. These two faculties are the source of all knowledge of the world's hidden wisdom, and true knowledge of the spiritual worlds can come from no other source. In Rosicrucianism, there is an essential difference between discovering spiritual truths and understanding them. Only those who have developed spiritual faculties in a fairly high degree can themselves discover a spiritual truth in the higher worlds. Clairvoyance is the necessary prerequisite for discovering a spiritual truth, but only for discovering it. For a long time to come, nothing will be taught exoterically by any genuine Rosicrucianism that cannot be grasped by the ordinary logical intellect. That is the essential point. The objection that clairvoyance is necessary for understanding the Rosicrucian form of wisdom is not valid. Understanding does not depend upon the faculty of seership. Those who are incapable of grasping Rosicrucian wisdom with their thinking have simply not developed their logical reasoning powers to a sufficient extent. That is all. Anyone who has absorbed all the modern culture is able to give, who is not too lazy to learn and has patience and perseverance, can understand what a Rosicrucian teacher has to impart. Those who have doubts about Rosicrucian wisdom and who say that they cannot grasp it must not blame this on their inability to rise to higher planes. The fault lies in their unwillingness either to exert their reasoning powers sufficiently or to put experiences gained from general culture to adequate use. Just think of the tremendous popularization of wisdom that has taken place since the appearance of Christianity down to the present day, and then try to picture Christian Rosicrucianism as it was in the 14th century. Think of the relation of a human being then living in the world with his teachers. It was only possible to work by means of the spoken word in those days. On the whole, we fail to appreciate what tremendous development has taken place since that time. Think only of what has resulted from the invention of printing. And to interject, and even now more so, with the internet, we literally have the Library of Alexandria in our pockets with these cell phones. And what do most people do? They use it for things like TikTok and Snapchat. And, not to say those things don't have their uses. Well, TikTok's pretty invasive, and that's been proven, but that's another subject. But, all these tech companies are. Quite honestly, like I said, another conversation for another time. But think of if we all used our cell phones to enlighten ourselves as opposed to just using it for purely material purposes like Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter, all this bickering back and forth and all this nonsense. Imagine if we used it to actually raise consciousness. Back to the reading. Think of the thousands and thousands of channels through which, thanks to that invention, the highest achievements of culture have been able to flow into civilization. From books down to the most trivial newspaper article, you can perceive the innumerable channels through which countless ideas flow into life. These channels have only been open for humanity since that time, and they have had the effect of making the Western intellect assume quite different forms. The Western mind has worked quite differently since then, and the new form of wisdom had necessarily to reckon with this fact. A form had to be created which would be able to stand its ground in face of all that flows into life along these thousands of channels. Rosicrucian wisdom can hold its own against any objection, whether popular or highly scientific. Rosicrucian wisdom contains within itself the sources which enable it to counter every objection made by science. A true understanding of modern science, not the dilettante understanding to be found even among university professors, but understanding that is free from abstract theorizing and materialistic conjectures, and is founded firmly upon facts and does not go beyond them, can find from science itself the proofs of the spiritual truths of Rosicrucianism. And I'll like to interject here, if you go back and read like the theosophical writings and Rosicrucian writings, all this ancient wisdom that has been compiled, you will see that the occultists were making predictions about scientific realities hundreds of years before modern science ever caught up to it. That's why this stuff holds credibility. Because the more you study it, you can go back and you can read and you can see what they were talking about. These writings are still available today. And it just takes modern science a long time to catch up with previously made coherent statements from occultists and esotericists. A second point concerning the relationship between teacher and pupil in Rosicrucianism is that the relationship of the pupil to the guru, in parentheses, as the teacher is called in the East, is fundamentally different from that prevailing in other methods of initiation. In Rosicrucianism, this relationship cannot in any way be said to be based upon belief in a superior authority. Let me make this clear to you by an example drawn from everyday life. The Rosicrucian teacher wants a relationship with his pupil which is like that of a mathematics teacher with his students. Can it be said that students of mathematics look up to their teacher simply out of a belief in authority? No. And can it be said that the students of mathematics do not need the teacher? Some people may argue that they do not, because they may have discovered how to teach themselves from good books. However, that situation differs from the one in which a student and teacher sit face to face. In principle, of course, self-instruction is possible. Equally, every human being, provided he reaches a certain stage of clairvoyance, can discover spiritual truths for himself. But this would be a much more lengthy path. It would be senseless to say, my own inner being must be the sole source of all spiritual truths. If the teacher knows mathematical truths and imparts them to his pupils, the pupils no longer need to have a belief in authority, for they grasp these truths through the correctness inherent in them. And all they need do is understand them. Let me say that again. If the teacher knows mathematical truths and imparts them to his pupils, the pupils no longer need to have a belief in authority, for they grasp these truths through the correctness inherent in them, and all they need do is understand them. So is it with all esoteric development in the Rosicrucian sense. The teacher is the friend, the counselor, one who has already lived through the esoteric experiences and now helps the pupils to do so themselves. Once someone has had these experiences, there is as little need for him to accept things on authority as there is in mathematics for him to accept on authority the statement that 3 angles of a triangle add up to 180 degrees. In Rosicrucianism, there is no authority in the ordinary sense. It is simply a question of what is required for shortening the path to the highest truths. And I'll interject right here and say that's what I was describing when I was reading An Esoteric Cosmology by Rudolf Steiner. In one of my commentaries, I was talking about how true occultism will prove itself to you if you stick with it. If you stick to unraveling the philosophy of the system that you're studying and you seek to truly understand it, the science will unfold itself. These truths are very evident. It's nothing that you have to have faith in. It will unfold itself, and you will know how it makes sense, why it makes sense, how it fits into the larger whole of the world and the universe. There's no guesswork in esotericism. You can know what these things mean. So, that's where it's different from normal religion. Like, religion tells you all these platitudes, but they never give you explanations. Half of that is because they don't know the explanations themselves in most cases. But that's because all of this wisdom has been watered down and lost through the years. But these orders who have kept the wisdom tradition alive, the Western esoteric wisdom tradition, the organizations like Freemasonry, the Rosicrucian Fellowship, and orders of this nature have kept these teachings alive, and they prove themselves. So you don't have to have faith in them. Once you begin on the path and you start unraveling these truths, they're very scientific. They prove themselves to you. So, interesting to note. That is the one side of the question. The other is the relation of spiritual wisdom to culture in general. These lectures will show you that it is possible for truth to flow directly into practical life. We are not setting up a system that is applicable in theory only. We are speaking of teachings which can be put to use in practical life by anyone who desires to know the deeper foundations of present-day worldly knowledge, and which allow spiritual truths to flow into everyday life. Rosicrucian wisdom must not stream only into the head, nor only into the heart, but also into the hand, into our manual skills, into our daily actions. It does not take effect as sentimental sympathy. It is the acquisition, by strenuous effort, of faculties enabling us to work for the well-being of humanity. Suppose some society were to proclaim human brotherhood as its aim and were to do no more than preach brotherhood. That would not be Rosicrucianism, for the Rosicrucian says, imagine someone lying in the road with a broken leg. If 14 people stand around him in pity, but not one of them is able to help, the whole 14 together are of less importance than a 15th who comes, perhaps without any sentimentality at all, but is able to, and actually does, deal with the broken leg. What he's describing here is, proper faith and proper action, right? Action. We've left action out of the equation for a very long time because we want to believe that if you just pray or if you just believe good things, that good things will happen. But what does it say in the Bible? It says, faith without works is dead, because it requires both of them. See, on the one side, these are the two streams of consciousness Steiner talks about. The Luciferic is the action side. The Jehovan is the faith side, right? And not faith as in blind faith, but faith as in having faith due to what you've witnessed. But that's a different topic. But anyway, just keep in mind that faith comes from the stream of Seth and from Solomon and Jehovah. It's the Jehovistic stream. Action and intellect and proof comes from the Luciferic. Christ balances both of these forces out. See, we need both in balance, in harmony, working together, not just one or the other. That's why in the Bible it says faith without works is dead. Let's continue. The attitude of the Rosicrucian is that what counts is knowledge able to take hold of and intervene effectively in life. Rosicrucian wisdom considers that repeated talk about pity and sympathy has an element of danger in it, for continual harping on sympathy denotes a kind of astral sensuality. Sensuality on the physical plane is of the same nature as on the astral plane, the constant wish to feel but never to know. Knowledge that is capable of taking effect in practical life, not, of course, in the materialistic sense, but because it is brought down from spiritual worlds, this is what enables us to work effectively. Harmony flows of itself from the knowledge that the world must progress, and it flows all the more surely because it arises quite naturally out of knowledge. You could say of someone who knows how to deal with a broken leg but does not do so that he neglects the sufferer because he dislikes people. Such a thing would be possible in the case of knowledge pertaining only to the physical plane, but it would not be possible for spiritual knowledge. There is no spiritual knowledge that would refrain from entering into practical life. This, then, is the second aspect of Rosicrucian wisdom, namely, that although it can be discovered only through the powers of clairvoyance, it can be understood by normal human reason. It may seem strange to say that in order to have experiences in the spiritual world, you must become clairvoyant, but that you need not be clairvoyant in order to understand what the clairvoyant sees. A seer who returns from the spiritual worlds and tells of what is going on there, bringing people knowledge that is necessary for humanity at the present time, can be understood if those who listen are willing to understand. For human beings are constituted in a way that makes it possible for them to understand. We shall begin by studying the sevenfold nature of the human being according to Rosicrucian teaching. We shall consider the whole of human nature as we see it before us. We shall learn to understand the nature of the physical body, about which so many think they know everything, while in fact they know nothing. As little as we can see the oxygen in water, but must separate it from the hydrogen in order to recognize it, as little do we see the real physical human being when we look at someone standing before us. The human being is a combination of physical body, ether body, astral body, and the other higher members, just as water is a combination of oxygen and hydrogen. The being before us is the sum total of all of these members. If we are to see the physical body alone, the astral body must have separated from it. This is the condition in dreamless sleep. Sleep is a kind of higher chemical separation of the astral body together with the higher members of our nature from the etheric and physical bodies. But even then, it cannot be said that we have the real physical body before us. The physical body is alone only at death, when the ether body, too, has left it. This has a direct and concrete bearing. I will make it clear to you by means of an example. Think of some particular part of the astral body. In the remote past, the pictures which the human being perceived in dim, shadowy clairvoyance worked very differently than do mental images today. These pictures were impressed, first of all, into the astral body. Let us suppose that at one time pictures of the 3 dimensions of space, length, breadth, depth, were impressed into the astral body. This picture of 3-dimensional space, which was once impressed into the astral body through the old dim clairvoyance, was carried over into the ether body. Just as a seal is pressed into liquid sealing wax, so did the astral picture impress itself into the ether body, which in turn molded the forms of the physical body. Thus, the picture of 3-dimensional space built an organ in a particular area of the physical body. Originally, there was a picture in the astral body of the 3 perpendicular directions of space. This picture impressed itself, like a seal, into wax, into the ether body, and a certain part of the ether body molded an organ in the interior of the human ear, namely the 3 semicircular canals. You all have them within you. If they are in any way impaired, you cannot orient yourself within the 3 directions of space. You get giddy and cannot stand upright. Thus are the pictures of the astral body connected with the forces of the ether body and the organs of the physical body. Yeah, anybody who knows when your inner ear gets messed up, your equilibrium gets thrown completely off. So what he's describing there is a point in time in evolution where our inner ear was developed for us to be able to move through the physical 3D world. And our inner ear was developed by certain planetary and cosmological conditions, certain arrangements of, the gravitational forces and other forces, other higher spiritual forces of all these bodies, planetary bodies, stuff like that, just cut the whatever was out in the cosmos at the time. As we evolved right along with it, anthropogenesis was going on at the same time as cosmogenesis was going on, so we're intimately bound up with that process. So as it was unfolding, so was the human unfolding. We unfolded these abilities to perceive what was around us due to the necessity of us being able to understand the world which we live in. It's quite fascinating. The whole way that the human physical body is shaped is nothing else than a product of the pictures of the astral body and the forces of the ether body. Hence, those who have no knowledge of the astral and ether bodies cannot understand the physical body. The astral body is the predecessor of the ether body, and the ether body is the predecessor of the physical body. This is how complicated these things are. The 3 semicircular canals are a physical organ, just as is the nose. All noses differ from one another, although there may be a resemblance between the noses of parents and children. If you were able to study the 3 semicircular canals inside the human ear, you would find differences and resemblances, just as in the case of noses, for these canals may resemble those of one's mother or father. What is not inherited is the innermost spirit, the eternal core which passes through successive incarnations. Individual talents and capacities are not determined by the brain. Logic is what it is. It is the same in mathematics, in philosophy, or in practical life. Differences in capacity only appear when logic is applied in areas involving particular physical organs, where knowledge depends, for instance, upon the functioning of the semicircular canals in the ear. Mathematical talent will be particularly marked when these organs are highly developed. An example of this is the Bernoulli family, which produced a succession of fine mathematicians. An individual may possess great incipient talent for music or some other art, but if he is not born into a human body that has inherited the requisite organic structures, he cannot bring these talents to expression. So you see, the physical world cannot be understood without knowledge of how it is constituted. The Rosicrucian does not consider it his task to withdraw in any way from the physical world. Certainly not. For what he has to do is to spiritualize the physical world. He must rise to the highest regions of spiritual life, and with the knowledge there obtained, labor actively in the physical world, especially amongst human beings. This is the Rosicrucian attitude, the direct outcome of Rosicrucian wisdom. We are about to study a system of wisdom which will enable us to understand even the smallest things, and we shall not forget that the smallest thing in the world can be of importance to the greatest, that the smallest thing, in its rightful place, can lead to the highest of goals. That is the end of the first lecture. And, the first lecture was almost kind of an introduction. It's going to start getting real good, so you guys will want to continue listening. That's it for now. I will be back sooner or later, hopefully sooner, to read lecture number 2. Go ahead, like, subscribe, share, do all that good stuff. It's all about spreading the word and bringing this knowledge back to the world, because this is ancient knowledge. When he mentions the 1400s in the beginning of that lecture, that's just the first time the Rosicrucian method showed up, that way of imparting this wisdom. The wisdom itself is as old as time itself. Quite amazing stuff. You're really going to like this. You're really going to like this book, I think. But I'll stop rambling on for now. Take care, everybody. Thanks for listening. That's it for now. We'll talk to you later.